From its inception right up until the late 2000s, Cartoon Network was the home of the Cartoon Christmas Special. Not only in terms of adapting its existing cartoons, but also in having one-off Christmas specials that would be run in syndication every Christmas for literal years, if not decades. Most people remember the classics, the Boris Karloff Grinch Who Stole Christmas, Grandma Got Run Over by a Reindeer, and Frosty the Snowman. They were all mainstays of the channel's Christmas run for years. But what about the forgotten Christmas specials? Nick and Noel had a very brief stint on the channel. Yogi's First Christmas was spotty in the UK but played more often than not. But here we're going to take a look at something that not a lot of people recall. Despite the fact that it was played every Christmas from its creation right the way through to when Cartoon Network finally gave up and more or less binned off the non-stop Christmas specials in December altogether. 2003's The Night Before Christmas was the network's attempt to reach out to the next generation of youth while also seemingly specifically trying to target minority audiences. This isn't uncommon, especially in kids' TV shows. From the likes of The Proud Family and Seabear and Jamal to Hammerman and Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids, network television has always had a tremendously stereotypical and cynical attitude towards its programming. The idea that white people will like predominantly white shows and vice versa. It's only really now as television approaches a distinct level of abstraction that gender, age, ethnicity and appearance doesn't really seem to matter anymore. Well, to anyone who's actually watching the shows. There are still the man-babies of the internet who cry "muh fandom" every time She-Ra or the Thundercats get a redesign, or every time a black, Asian or gay character is introduced or revealed, but that's a dumpster fire I ain't touching at this time of year. I'm here to talk semi-obscure Christmas specials. So, The Night Before Christmas is the hip-hop hooray story of Elven, known also by his rapper name Slim Shorty, because he's an elf. Elven, well, is an elf, and he's just turned 18 on the 12th of December, which means he's perfectly placed to join his family in the toy manufacturing game at the North Pole. But Elven has broader aspirations. He wants to be a musician and a rap artist. And you don't get to become one of the best rappers on the East or West Coast if you don't even live anywhere near either of those. So he purposely gets himself fired by modernising Santa's older, more traditional wooden toys, train sets and drum kits, with MIDI chips and motors. All this modern flim-flam just won't fly, and with notice served, Elven packs up his belongings and catches the next reindeer flight to Oregon. Asking why will only make your head hurt. Anyway, almost immediately Elven's car is crushed by a passing truck, and so with no car, cash or direction, all seems lost before it even really started. That is, until a black SUV pulls up and offers Elven a lift to California. Driving said SUV? An upcoming rapping dog called Pup Daddy, and his recently liberated gnome homie, Seamus. The pair of them were heading to Cali anyway, because apart from being an upcoming rapper, Pup's girlfriend is also one of the best singers in Cali. She's also a talking dog, called Jel-O. I'm sure you can see a theme forming here. Anyway, they all make it to California and head to a nightclub called the Copacabana, where they see Jel-O being upstaged by a literal pig. Not having that for a moment, the gang all storm the stage, and with the power of Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five themselves, Pup, Elven and Jel-O dominate the night. So much so that they catch the eye of an obvious evil record producer. Meanwhile, back at the North Pole, a mysterious flu-like virus has broken out and is wiping out Santa's workforce and even takes out the big man himself. Things are looking bad at the North Pole, but for Elven and the crew, things are going from strength to strength. On the downside, they're being severely overworked by their cruel record producer and his malicious daughter, Evelina. Yes, that's actually a name. But on the plus side, they're getting results and breaking new ground. Things aren't ideal, but Elven is sure that they'll be free of this rogue manager soon enough, and then he can go off to have a fantastic solo career. That is until while on tour, Elven sees Santa give a broadcast in which he announces that unless something drastic changes, Christmas will be cancelled. This hits Elven hard in the feels, and he decides that he needs to step up for the needs of the many. The record producer disagrees and demands Elven stay and complete his tour. So Elven does a runner, and gets captured, and gets locked in a gold jail cell at the record producer's house, I think? Will Elven and the gang escape and save Christmas, or will the record producer make his multi-million-dollar deal fly despite all the sadness it'll cause? And who exactly calls their daughter Evil Lena anyway? All these questions and more will be answered in this rap-tastic Christmas special that I can assure you is both fabulous, festive, and funky fresh. I think there's an important thing to bear in mind with this special that'll really put a lot of it into a much clearer position, and that's that this special is self-aware. It knows it's supposed to be a schmaltzy Christmas special. It knows how cheesy and ridiculous it is to force a Beatles-esque rise to fame narrative into a hokey Christmas special about compassion for your fellow man. It's aware of its place in the schedule, of its audience, and how much time it has to achieve what it wants to. So it has fun with the notion of its own existence. It doesn't do anything massively clever, and it's not using its self-awareness to launch us into some abstract meltdown like Wonder Shows and or Look Around You. Basically, within the first 5 to 10 minutes, this special says, yeah, we know you've sat through 8 hours of The Grinch and Dot and Spot's Magical Christmas Adventure, so let's go about things a bit differently for the next half an hour, eh? The reason I feel it's so important to stress this before we get to the meat and gravy of this review is, in a bit of a first for this channel, I decided to look up a couple of existing reviews for this special that were already on YouTube. And what I found was that a lot of people who've spoken about this have either completely chosen to ignore the fact that this special is so painfully self-aware, or otherwise the type of self-awareness it runs with just wasn't for them. But it's because of the fact that it's aware of what it is and how it goes about doing what it does that made me warm to it so much more than anyone else I could find talking about this online has. Now don't get me wrong, I'm not sitting here and saying that it's a great special and an essential watch by any stretch of the imagination, but compared to some of the dreck that's pumped out onto our screens over the holiday period, this was actually kind of refreshing in a way. For starters, pretty much all of the special is delivered via rhyme, which to me had the Stuart Lee effect of starting out neat, then getting irritating, then genuinely becoming impressive, then horrifically irritating, then terrifically impressive. And that feeling just grows and grows as the special goes on, as you realise someone really, really overworked their rhyming dictionary over a long afternoon. I personally thought it was quite impressively handled, and while I can appreciate that it may not be to everyone's taste, the fact that they worked in 2 to 3 music videos plus an on-stage performance without breaking flow in such a way that works back into the narrative fairly seamlessly is actually a pretty decent achievement. It's certainly a step up on the more typical Christmas narratives that were doing the rounds at the time. The plot is, in and of itself, pretty simple, but I like the fact that they use slightly more adult themes to progress the story. How many kids' Christmas specials can you think of that feature being fired as the catalyst for a plot to kick off? How many can you think of that feature scrupulous record producers holding a band hostage? This thing has some unusual and interesting ideas behind it that contextually really lift it up and out of the mire of the generic Christmas special genre. It's memorable, and it takes a lot to be memorable these days. The pacing is a bit odd in all honesty, but that's largely dependent on what cut you're watching. Yes, this special has 2 cuts, a full screen and a widescreen edition. And the widescreen edition, the version I watched for this review, is fleshed out to make it a pseudo 3-act structure where the music videos punctuate and break up the 3 acts. These music videos are made up mostly of footage from the special itself, which, if this were over an hour, I'd understand why they did that, but the widescreen version of this special is about 26 minutes long, which means it either ran drastically under and they needed to pad it out, or they wanted to create a new USP to try and flog physical copies of this special. Equally, there are a few stereotypical bits that most definitely would not be allowed on kids' TV these days. It just so happens that the only 2 Asian characters in this special are pretty much solidly qualified as homeopaths. Yeesh, that's rough. And these stereotypes extend to pretty much everyone barring the dogs in this special. But that's one of the only things that did seem really a bit out of sorts about this. The only other thing was one particular part of the story where the record producer gets tricked into a jail cell because it's revealed he has an insatiable love for waffles and meatloaf at the same time. It comes out of nowhere and it goes nowhere. It's the only part of this that I thought was genuinely stupid and didn't really add anything other than a quick way to tie up a particular closing part of one of the narrative threads. The art style and direction is, well, a bit ugly in honesty. Obviously taste is subjective and I'm quite grateful it isn't unsettling, as I've had quite enough of unsettling Christmas animations for one lifetime. But here it's all very harsh edges, thick lines, and there isn't really a sense of depth in these sequences. And because the style is heavily based on minimalism, the backgrounds of these sequences are sparse to say the least, and characters only really have minimal lines, it just means that there isn't really a whole lot of wiggle room to find any nice moments in this, honestly. They committed to a distinct style outright, and all I can say is that it just didn't really land for me. I mean, a benefit to that again is that it's very distinct, and it must have done something right in that regard, as it's left an impression with me that's lasted all these years later. But if you're coming here for fluid, high detail, rich animation, you're gonna have a bad time. Surprisingly, given how this turned out, the director behind it is actually highly reputable. This was directed by Ron Myrick, who, while only having 21 directing credits in his roster, I say only 21, it's 20 more than some of the directors I've covered here, there's some quite big hitters in this, including the Sonic the Hedgehog TV series, Garfield and Friends, and the 90s animated Incredible Hulk series. Equally, he also has 118 animating credits that run from the late 80s right the way through to the modern day. What's he worked on animation-wise? Pretty much fucking everything. Seriously, his IMDb reads more like a list of every cartoon from the 80s to the 2000s and beyond, rather than a serious resume. It's ludicrous and extremely impressive to check out. Also working on the direction front, we have Tom Tartaronowitz. Sure I murdered that pronunciation. Who has 24 directing credits, including She-Ra, the new Ghostbusters, and the RoboCop animated series. We definitely have a case of diminishing returns here, as I'm struggling to see how two clearly very creative and artistic people could let the ball drop art-wise with this one. I can only assume it was done either to make a quick buck, or it was done with genuine intent, but when the results of their stylistic choices came back it just wasn't quite right, but then they were committed at that point to finish it in that style. On writing duties, we have Sib Ventress. They have 32 writing credits, including a good chunk of the TV series Danny Phantom, alongside The Mask and Seabear and Jamal. They also worked on a few episodes of the animated Dumb and Dumber TV series, which is one of those shows that I always forget exists for a few years at a time before being reminded. For better or worse. From a writing perspective, I'd say this special does have a few similar tropes and themes to Danny Phantom. I'm not saying they're identical, and I'm not saying that they have a similar pace of humour, but there's just a vibe with this in the way that it's written tonally that does feel somewhat in tone with the vibe of Danny Phantom. Finally, let's deal with the vocal performances and the soundtrack back to back, as most of the cast end up singing a song or two throughout this. It's arguably one of the better aspects of this special. The cast are all aware of just how corny and weird this special is, and their performances reflect that in a not overbearing way that kept me on side for the most part. There aren't really any majorly irritating voices here, and while I'm not the biggest rap fan in the world, though if I had to pick an era I'm pretty OG, all the love to De La Soul, NWA, Grandmaster Flash and Snoop, the soundtrack's pretty tight here. It's hardly biting, cutting-edge social commentary, but considering Cartoon Network was a bit adrift at this point in terms of what it thought kids wanted, to see some R&B and rap slide in here at the start of the decade was quite a nice touch. The beats are a little tasty, the lyrics are a bit bland, but the two balance out to something that's ultimately pretty palatable. The Night Before Christmas was released on DVD in the US in 2003. It may or may not have had a reissue in 2007, I imagine it was just a repackaging affair, but other than that, it's not really been released in any other way. It ran on Cartoon Network around Christmas time every year between 2003 and 2008. It may have run even longer than that, but that's as far as I can find information on it up to. The most crucial part of all of this, the DVD had a ton of extra features, which is just nuts. Not only do you get the choice to watch the movie both in full screen and widescreen, they just stretch the image, but you also get a making of documentary, which, for this movie, is just silly and makes the release even more interesting as an oddity. Ultimately, despite its slightly off visual style and a few scripting issues here and there, I really kinda liked this one. It's by no means a classic and definitely won't win any awards anytime soon, but it's an askew take on the Christmas special format. It's also one of the only kids animated Christmas specials I can think of to feature a Black Santa, so that's definitely a win on the cultural diversity front. If you've got kids, I think they'll kinda like this one, assuming they get the odd 90s and 2000s references sprinkled throughout this, that is. As an adult, well, you can definitely do much worse, and I think this would make a nice little alternative if you're tired of your usual go-to specials. My advice? Give it a try. You literally can do worse.